Let's take a look at the evolution of supported employment. Obviously, it is relatively new in the scheme of things. Conceptually, the term supported employment. People probably have been employed in integrated settings, people with disabilities, with somebody assisting them in some manner or form for hundreds of years, I mean, I would think, right? But as to the term and being part of our system of supports, it's relatively new. Let's take a look at it. If we take a look at 1980s, and in the early 80s, I don't remember anybody ever talking about supported employment at all. We had lower employer expectations. In other words, we would commonly tell an employer, well, I mean, he can't do this or he can't do this, and you need to make this accommodation because he can't do this. So we tend to lower the expectations of the employer. Those lowered expectations, in part, can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? In part. And now as we move into the millennium meaning 1,000 years, so we're looking at the period of 2000 on, we have the employer, we're trying to convince the employer that the person is capable and that they'll grow in the job, they can gain new skills, and they'll be a good employee. In the 80s, we had the term community access, which is interesting, meaning that we're giving the person access to the community. There was no thought of really integrating them with other people, but they had access to the community. The words inclusion were not really used. And then as we got to the millennium, we talked about full integration, being truly part of the workforce. And in the 80s, the job coach was the trainer. Your trainer, when you went to work, somebody had to teach you what it is you do. Yep. You did not have a job coach. The agency where you work, your supervisor, and maybe even your colleagues, some of the people you work with who have been there for a while, would give you suggestions, or you'd see how they'd be doing things. And so that is a huge transition. Like when I'm at Kroger, and I'll have some photos for you later, which is a grocery store chain in Indiana, the people who do bagging at the end of the counter, you know, the lane where you put your food and everything, it is commonly expected that the cashier is supervising and giving direction to the baggers. So some of these baggers have folks with Down syndrome, some of them have autism, and it's really interesting how some of the cashiers they really form a really good alliance with some of these folks. So the guy at the end, I got a picture of this guy. The guy who's doing the bagging has Down syndrome, and he is really gregarious. He wants to talk to everyone. So he'll start his conversation, and all the groceries keep coming down. And so the cashier goes, right? Just sorry. And he knows what that means. Get back on track, buddy. Come on. Let's get these groceries in the bag. So natural supports. And the job coach is now a facilitator to facilitate the relationships between the supervisor, facilitate the relationships between other employees who are there so that they truly become part of that employment team. In the 80s, the job coach guaranteed production. So what did we see? Oh my gosh, you had to have the job coach forever, because if the person wasn't producing at the expected rate, the job coach would always step in and get the job done. Now we're realizing, well, we can't do that. We don't have enough job coaches. You can't just stay there to make sure production quotas are met. We're going to have to do some kind of accommodation for that person if they don't do it. By the way, what happens at Kroger? Anybody have a guess? When the groceries start coming down a lot and the person really is trying their best, but just the nature of their disability, they can't keep up. What happens? Anybody have a guess?
The cashier.
That's exactly right. Cashier will turn around rather than a job coach and just start putting stuff there. Because some of those lanes, by the way, don't even have baggers. The cashier has to do it. So if the person can't keep up, the cashier comes forward and does that. How did that happen? How did the cashier end up thinking that way? That was the job coach. They facilitated that understanding and making that happen. And you know, some of those cashiers or supervisors are amenable to that. Other people are not, you know. So it may not work, that employment setting, if the supervisor or the cashier is not amenable to it. And we now want people to understand that the employee is competent. They're capable. They will improve their skills over time and get that job done. Now let's talk about section 14C, highly provocative. been around forever, 1934, 1935, 1936. The National Federation for the Blind was the primary organization that facilitated and encouraged Congress to pass 14C. 14C is these wage certificates that indicate that employers do not have to pay people minimum wage. We do not have to pay them the normative wage. We can pay them a commensurate wage. And it is so contentious because a very large part of the disability community says, get rid of these wage certificates. They're horrible. Most wage certificates, anybody have a thought? Who holds most of these wage certificates? Where are they? Anybody have a thought?
Day programs?
Pardon me?
Day programs?
Well, yeah, you're close. Easter Seals, UCP, the ARCs across the United States, a lot of them are the actual holders of it. So it's sort of interesting that the disability community sees these wage certificates as discriminatory, but it's not McDonald's. McDonald's could have them. I mean, a general employer could have them, but the majority of the wage certificates are actually held by the provider community, but the disability community says they're discriminatory. I just find that interesting. Let's take a look at this because it's really an important concept in this whole discussion. In 1938, Congress addressed how, and again, this is not my language, directly from the website. I know it's not people first, quote, disabled Americans versus Americans with disabilities, are paid. A decision was made that allowed employers, after receiving a special certificate from the DOL, Department of Labor, to pay employees with physical and or mental disabilities special wages, less than the federal minimum wage based on the employee's productivity. So I certainly recall at the sheltered workshop that I operated as part of the ARC, our sheltered employees got paid once every 2 weeks like our staff. We had sheltered employees, and I am not exaggerating, go home with a paycheck of $3.40 in 2 weeks. And literally working 40 hours a week. Now, fair? Not fair? We did time studies. So we had a packaging contract with Majestic, which was a company that made these pools on fireplace screens, and so we did this. There was a company in Huntington, Indiana, and we did all these time studies, and usually have 3 staff do the time study, and then you take the average of their productivity, and so you say they can do 100 of these packaging things an hour, and this guy only does, and you pay minimum wage for that, and this guy only does 5, so he's only going to get 5% of minimum wage. So he's going to take home, even though he's there on task, sitting in a chair, he's going to take home $3.40. And there's different ways of looking at this. You can say, well, that's horrible. But at the same time, what was he doing before that? He was sitting around playing old maiden checkers in a day program. He wasn't earning any money. He wasn't paying any taxes. He wasn't doing anything that's productive. So we got to look at both sides of the coin. I'm not defending it. I'm just saying you got to look at it. Approximately 420,000 individuals are so approved. The certificate allows for a payment of commensurate, again, commensurate wage, commensurate with what you produce, as determined by a productivity test. And we did these tests. We usually ran them for a 50-minute hour. In other words, we would have 3 employees do the task for 50 minutes and then take an average of that, and that would be what one would produce in an hour. In 1986, now this is really interesting. In 1986, the floor of the federal minimum wage was removed. So prior to 1986, you had to pay people a commensurate wage based upon the federal minimum wage. So in 1986, that floor was removed, so you didn't have to pay them 10% of the federal minimum wage. You could pay them about anything. It was removed. Now, if you go look over here, it says starting at 75% in 1938. So in 1938, when the certificate came into being, 14C, you had to pay people at least 75% of the minimum wage. And then in 1966, it went down, you had to pay them at least 50% of minimum wage. In 1986, you didn't have to pay them any guaranteed percent. You only paid them what was commensurate. Is that making sense? I know it's a little confusing. So the floor was removed. And I think, here's my guess, I think it was removed because the federal minimum wage was going up every year, and it was becoming too much to guarantee 75% or 80% of the federal minimum wage, even though I believe, and I'll be close, the federal minimum wage now is like $7.50 an hour. Can you believe that? I mean, and we talk about paying people real living wages, $7.50. Your minimum wage in California, I think now is maybe $15.20 an hour, somewhere around there. And if you're in fast food industry and flipping hamburgers, you're guaranteed $20 an hour. My goodness gracious. So, okay, so you got this thing. So there's currently no guarantee of a certain percent you have to pay people if they have a wage certificate. It's just totally commensurate with no minimum bottom guarantee. Proponents for eliminating Section 14C of the Federal Labor Standards Act of 1938, this is what they contend, the people who want to eliminate it. It prevents Americans with disabilities from being as self-sufficient as their potential should allow. Well, I think it alters how people perceive themselves, and it also alters how other people perceive them. So it tends to impair self-sufficiency, and we'll also note it impairs economic self-sufficiency. Because if I'm going to be forced to have to use public assistance because I can't earn enough money. So if you think about it, it's pay me now or pay me later. If I'm only going to earn $3 an hour because I'm on a labor certificate, you know I'm going to get SNAP, right? I'm going to have food stamps. I'm going to get housing assistance. I'm going to get HUD. So one way or the other, we're going to be giving that person money if they don't earn it, which is very interesting. So if we eliminate, this is my thought, if we eliminate the wage certificate and employers have to pay people the actual, what other people get for that job, unrelated to it being commensurate, might it make more sense to actually provide the employer a subsidy rather than giving the money as we do now to the employee? So let's make them ineligible for food stamps. Let's make them ineligible for housing assistance because in order to get those benefits, it's based upon a financial means test. I would like to see them all fail the financial means test. Are you all with me?
Yes.
I want to see them fail it because they're earning so much money. I want to see the employer encouraged to pay them a non-commensurate wage, but the actual wage by getting a subsidy. So you have to, I don't hear anybody proposing that, but this is my thought. Because if I'm an employer and I am a manager at McDonald's and I can't get a wage certificate, and the guy with Down syndrome who I employ is at 25%, he only busses 25% of the tables, that what an average employee would do. Am I going to really hire him if I have to pay him the same thing? No, I'm not going to hire him. I got a bottom line here to make at McDonald's. And by the way, is that discrimination? No. I have a right to deny people employment if they don't meet the qualifications for the job. I'm not doing it because he has Down syndrome or an intellectual disability. I'm doing it because he's not meeting the requirements of the job, as you have to bus X number of tables per hour. Whew. A lot of thought goes into this. Here we go. It leads to reliance on government programs, as I just said. So if I don't earn enough money and I meet the means test, I'm now relying on SNAP and everything else. Yes, ma'am. Yes, we finally got a question. Yes, go for it. Jolene.
So I find that a lot of parents rely on the Social Security. So when they come to me for supportive
Sure.
employment, the parents are like, no, he cannot work full time. And I'm like, but he can. And they're willing to hire him and he wants to work. And then the parents are like, no, like,
Sure.
he can't.
We get that too.
So then
Yeah.
I'm at like, okay, well, you applied, they're offered you the job, you're gonna be making $18 an hour, you're gonna make more money than you would on unemployment or SSI, and then, you know, the parents just, they don't let them.
Yeah, some of the
The care provider that they live with will say, then you won't make your care providing or, you know, or whatever.
Some of the people we support will not be freed until their parents pass away. Some of us will not be freed until our parents pass away. It's not the child-parent relationship, it's the pathology of the relationship. And some of those relationships, as you just depicted, are not the healthiest of relationships. And if the parent reversed it, they would not want to have been treated that way themselves. They would want to be able to, you know, they're doing it for their own self, right? Okay. don't know how else to say it. We're going to talk about ABLE, too, which, by the way, can help a lot with regard to helping families be more willing to have their family member earn more money without impairing entitlement programs. 95% of people with disabilities, this is really interesting, who are paid sub-minimum wages never obtain the competitive integrative employment they strive for according to NFB, National Federation for the Blind. The intent originally of the certificate was to allow people to enter the employment system and then be able to move out of, because it was almost all sheltered employment, by the way, because people who were blind in this country had very, very low rates of employment. So it was the National Federation for the Blind that lobbied Congress to get these wage certificates in so people could work in sheltered employment programs. And the idea is you would transition from sheltered employment to a more integrated employment setting. Never really happened. 95% never got integrated, right? And Section 14C, again, wages should not be, oh, this is really interesting. I'd like you to process this. Wages should not be linked solely to productivity in ensuring a sub-minimum wage certificate. Rather, the in-place contribution should be measured and valued. This is a really interesting, it's a profound statement, and it's so significant. The presence of the person with disability changes the understanding and attitude of the larger community to appreciate the fact, are you ready? Disability is part of the human condition. That almost makes me cry. Do you understand how profound that is? When you don't know people, you can't trust people. You won't see them as your equal. You know, I have 7 grandkids, and 2 of my grandsons go to a fully integrated school. They did, they're in college now. They went to a fully integrated elementary school. They had no special education classes. All children, regardless of the acuity of their disability, were in the same age class as any other child. So you would see a little girl in the 4th grade class who had profound intellectual challenges, quadriplegia as a result of cerebral palsy. She had no speech. She's in a 4th grade class sitting next to a little girl in the 4th grade who is academically advanced, reading a story to her. The child who will use the wheelchair in her IEP, she had an objective of improving her auditory attention. The other child who was advanced had an objective of fluency when reading the story and reading the story with emotion. So I'm going to pick up my 2 grandsons. And schools now aren't what they were when I went to school. And you go to a typical elementary school now, and they have these large lobbies, and you have to ring a bell in order to get in. They thought I was a terrorist. I had to go through some damn magnotics thing to leave my gun at the desk. I mean, it was all this stuff. It's ridiculous. So I'm going in. They have all these nice sofas and chairs, and other parents and grandparents picking kids up. And here come 2 kids, 2 girls, probably in the 3rd or 4th grade. And they're going, bah, 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 bah. And one uses a wheelchair, and she's talking, and it appears that she has spina bifida to me. I mean, she's pretty articulate, didn't see any contractures, no issues of range of motion. And they're heading to an extracurricular activity. They have art programs after school that kids can take these art classes, and that's where they're going. 2 other boys coming down the hall to go to a basketball game, because several years after the elementary school was built, they built a junior high school that was attached, and usually one day a week, the junior high has a basketball game, and kids from the elementary school go, and these 2 guys are going down the hall, and they're talking. One has a quad cane going down the hall, and he has an AFO on his right ankle, has mild to severe cerebral palsy, and he's walking down the hall, right? Actually, it wasn't a quad cane. It was like a Canadian crutch thing around his wrist. And all of a sudden, coming down the hall, I hear this noise. This guy running down the hall on his toes, flapping his arms, takes his books and throws them down the hall as far as they can go, sliding down the hall. And the teacher looks, sort of shakes her head, and goes on over and picks up the books in a very matter-of-fact kind of way. And as this has happened on some occasion, it says, Jimmy, honey, can you come here? Billy doesn't want to carry his books. Are you going to get on the bus with Jimmy? Here, I'm going to give you his books. Make sure you give that to him when he gets off the bus. Anybody want to render a diagnosis? Right? He has autism. So that is the environment where my grandsons attended school. So we could be at a restaurant, and there could be someone at the next table who had cyclopia. Not that they would, but I'm giving you the... Cyclopia is a condition where you only have one eye right in the center of your head. It's horrible. People usually don't survive it. But let's say they had cyclopia. They don't see it. They don't stare. They don't look. It's not that they don't understand or recognize that that person has some significant challenges. There's no turning of the head. And we can be in a grocery store and somebody comes in the opposite direction who's just been a horrific fire and their ears are gone and their nose is gone and burns all over, and they never break stride. They may be sensitive to the fact that an accommodation may need to be made, but they just see it as part of the human condition. My grandsons do not see color the way that I see color. They go to a fully racially integrated school. I had no black kids in my school. We had none in my neighborhood. They don't see color. I do. Are you getting my drift? The employment, that contribution, is about changing the hearts and minds of our community. About who are these people? I mean, we change hearts and minds, okay, when the traditional day wasting program goes to a shopping mall and do mall herding, and there's a staff walking around with a 30-year-old man with Down syndrome holding his hand like he's 3. We're communicating something to those people in the shopping mall, but not anything I think we should be communicating to them. So it's about changing attitude. And I'm going to make a statement. Somebody tried to push me on it yesterday, and I'm just going to leave it sit. I just hope you got my drift. There has never been a time in my lifetime that I'm more concerned about where we are going with respect to changing the hearts and minds of our community than I am now. Never. Fill in the damn blank. Got it? I am very concerned. And I'm running out of time. I mean, and I don't mean 4:30 today. I mean, I'm 78. And somebody needs to be out there trying to figure out how we're going to change the hearts and minds of our community. So you see the role of employment? It's not just employment. If I didn't think that we could change attitudes and there would be a degree of acceptance, I wouldn't be the proponent of employment like I am. I see it as a strategy to alter our society. That's what I believe, how people with disabilities are being perceived. And if that doesn't happen, I'll be very disappointed. I can take a group of several people in any position or role, whether it's in a factory or whether it's service coordination at a regional center, and there will be significant differences between that group of people with regard to their level of productivity. But if they all came into the same position on the same day, they're all getting the same amount of money unrelated to what their level of productivity is. That's a fact. I mean, that's just true. Recognizing that. Also recognizing that the longer the person is in that role, their productivity will increase. So what you do on day one is very different than what happens on 3 months later, and that's true for all of us. So everybody follow that point about that contribution, that physical presence of that person. And the same thing, and by the way, the bottom of every single slide, and there's 5,280 slides that comprise all my training, literally, go to my website, has the same 2 words on the bottom of every slide. And that's what's significant. Universal enhancement. So everything that we're talking about applies in the concept of race, religion, national orientation, sexual orientation. Hey, this is not about people with disabilities, if you haven't figured it out, okay? It's about the way one group treats another when there is a dimension for which they have a prejudice. And the intent of this employment, in my opinion, is to assist our larger community in overcoming their prejudices regarding people with disabilities. But the same thing holds true. I can use the same strategy. I'm just here because I've been hired to talk about people with disabilities, but it doesn't make any difference. It's all the same. Sometimes people come in and say, Tom's going to give us a new method, a new technique, a new strategy we can use on people with developmental disabilities. Watch out. Those people are dangerous. These are the same people who have special strategies and techniques for Latinos, Catholics, Jews, African Americans, and people from Omaha. There are no special strategies, guys. Seriously, everything that we're talking about is universally applied, in my opinion. The contextual basis of subminimum wages has been ignored. that, quote, even if an individual is paid sub-minimum wage for a particular type of job at a particular time, there should be no assumption that the individual is incapable of earning minimum wage or higher in a different position or in the same position with benefit of experience, which I just referenced. Now, APSE uses as part of its foundation the concept of employment first. Employment first is different than APSE, but APSE uses that construct, I guess is the best way I could say it. It's a construct, it's a belief about employment first. So what is employment first? It is a declaration of both philosophy and policy, I can't see this, stating that employment is the first priority and preferred outcome of people with disabilities. And your state legislature and the regional center system have fully embraced that in writing, and I will be sharing that with you. So where's the disconnect here, right? Employment First uses typical or customized employment techniques to secure membership in the workforce, where employees with disabilities are included on the payroll of competitive business or industry or self-employed business owners. It provides at least a minimum wage or prevailing wage and benefits for the assigned task, provides opportunities for integration, interaction, and coworkers without disabilities with customers and the general public. All individuals have the right to explore the full range of employment options to empower informed choice and foster self-determination. Career planning is a requirement, and yeah, it is a requirement. And you know, commonly we ask people, well, what kind of job would you want? How do you want to be employed? And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about, well, what do you do when somebody doesn't have their job of choice? You know, I'll go into an organization and I'm always introducing myself to, hi, my name is Tom. And the guy's like 25, 26 years old. And I said, seems pretty capable. I introduced himself and he's talking to me. I said, are you currently employed? Are you working? Oh, you're not. Have you ever had a job? You don't. Well, why not? Oh, you're looking for a job. Well, how long have you been looking? 5 years. So what's the problem? Oh, you haven't found what you want yet in a job. By the way, am I making this up? Don't point your finger at him. He's in an agency. That's part of their philosophy. That's what they believe. That's what they got him to believe. Trust me, if any of you right now couldn't find the job that you want, you'd be taking any damn job that came along in order to meet your obligations as an adult, support yourself and your family. But we got a very different attitude about our folks. The rightists, they're part of the problem here. These radical rightists, he's got a right. Just don't ask me to pay for it. Wait till I drill down on this stuff here, guys. I work too damn hard to be paying for that person not to work. And I don't want my money going to waiver dollars being paid to that agency so he can sit on his butt and do nothing. If you want to pay for it, you pay for it. I don't want to. All individuals have the right to earn a living wage at a job of their choosing based upon their unique talents, gifts, skills, and interests. Certainly, I would agree with that. But what if we can't find that job or they can't find it? As with all employees, persons with disabilities should have access to services and supports necessary to succeed in the workplace, meaning accommodations as necessary. Part of the challenge is you advocate for yourself if you need an accommodation, right? I mean, every one of us have needed some accommodation in our place of employment. You maybe have said, gee, my child is really sick, so you'll talk to your supervisor and say, hey, I can't get my sitter to come in for my child, and so I can't come to work until 10 o'clock, but I'll do this instead. Or my back really hurts me, and I'm having a hard time in the office chair. Would you be willing to get a different chair for me so I can sit in the chair? You advocate for yourself. The problem is most of the people who we support, and this is a critical point, can't advocate for themselves because they don't even know what their disability is. We have made a decision to not even tell most of these people you have an intellectual disability. They don't even know it. Oh, they can tell you that they have Down syndrome. I can tell you I have cerebral palsy. I can tell you I have seizures and epilepsy, but shh, it's like the C word, cancer. You can't talk about, you have an intellectual disability. How in the world can you request or ask for or advocate for an accommodation if you don't even know what your disability is? And what's interesting, there are now teachers in high school, they're called transition teachers in special education for folks between 18 and 21, who mandate that every single child, to whatever extent possible, fully understand their disability and knows what accommodations they will be needing in an employment setting. But most provider agencies will not deal with it. They won't say, you have an intellectual disability, and this is what you may need to be more successful in the job. We won't tell them, right? You know, just a personal story. My granddaughter, she's the oldest now, she's 21. When she was 6 years old, we're driving, she's in the car. Isabel, stop making those noises, you're driving me nuts. Isabel, stop it. And you talk to Isabel and she goes, Isabel, no need for the faces. Stop with the faces. And pretend this is the doorway. Now, you normally walk through a doorway this way. Isabel walks through a doorway this way. Isabel, and you don't have to go in circles walking through the doorway. So it's time for her to go into second grade. And my daughter, and she has to go to her pediatrician in the summer to get her vaccinations. And my daughter said, Dad, should I tell the pediatrician about, I said, yes, tell the pediatrician. So he goes to the pediatrician. My daughter calls me afterward and says, Dad, they just referred her to a pediatric neurologist. I said, that's weird. So she goes to the pediatric neurologist. My daughter calls me and says, I'll never forget the call, that she's just been diagnosed with Tourette's. And if you're really smart, you already figured it out. Goulet de la Tourette's. And I'm really upset. I'm upset not because she's diagnosed with Tourette's. I'm upset because I missed it. I'm supposed to be an expert in this stuff, right? And I got to defend myself. The reason I missed it is that Tourette's is now a spectrum disorder. It used to be that people were not diagnosed with Tourette's until they were at least 15, 16, 17 years old and had full-blown Tourette's. Now it's spectrum in terms of if you even have mild facial grimacing, implosives, you're on the spectrum. Some people, it's more intense than others, right? So my daughter says, Dad, should we tell her? I said, well, of course you tell her. So my daughter, son-in-law, and Isabel come to the house. My wife and I are sitting down, and my daughter says, Isabel, do you remember then when we went to the doctor last week? No, she was like 7 and a half, something. And the doctor asked you about those faces that you make? Yes, Mommy. Well, that's called facial grimacing. And you know those noises that you make? She says, those are plosives. And you can't help that. You know, like when you have to sneeze, and I thought this is a great explanation. When you have to sneeze and you can't hold back the sneeze, you have to sneeze. She says, it's sort of the same way. But once you make that sound, then you feel better, right? And she says, Isabel, you can't help that. And you have a condition called Tourette's. And most children, and it's true, like 70%, after they get through adolescence, it dissipates, it goes away. And she says, well, Isabel, you know, we hope that this will go away. And right now, you would not pick up that she has it. I can, because she's my granddaughter, but you wouldn't notice it. And so she said, excuse me, Isabel, do you have any questions? Is there something you want to ask me? And she says, Mommy, does that mean I'm not a bad girl? Oh. We'd been riding her butt. Quit doing that. Why are you making those noises and sounds? When in fact, it was non-volitional. We don't even care enough about the people who we support to take that monkey off their damn back. If I could get just one regional center to do it, one, how much money would it cost? Whose permissions needed? What policy would be violated? We won't do it. The same reason we won't make any environment accessible. What can I tell you, folks? And we're complaining about parents? Give me a break. And I'm not negative. I know this may sound negative. I need to make another statement. The quality of life of the people who we support has never been better than it is today. That's a fact. But guess what? It's not good enough. We have major issues we need to address. And we can't turn our back on them. And if no one else is going to do it, what are you going to do? You all have a controllable column. There are two columns in life. There's a column in life of things I can control and a column in life of things I cannot control. And as you listen to this discussion today, I want you to make a decision about your controllable column. There are people who spend their whole life focusing on the non-controllables. And I have a name for these people. I call them victims. Don't be a victim in this. Don't be looking at your supervisor to move this thing forward. Your executive director is probably not going to do a damn thing differently than they've ever done before. Quit waiting for the regional center. What are you going to do? End of story. It is presumed that all working age adults and youth with disabilities can work in jobs fully integrated within the general workforce, working side by side with coworkers without disabilities, earning minimum wage or higher. Okay, so what does APSE think about work enclaves? What do they think? What's your thought?
I doubt if they like them.
They don't want them, of course not. And is a work enclave better than sheltered employment? Of course. What do they think about mobile work crews? They don't like them. And even the concept of a workstation in industry, and we're going to look at all those definitions, they're not going to support it because it's not fully integrated. And I'm willing to take what I can get closest to what I want. As with all other individuals, employees with disabilities, this last one's really important. Implementation of employment first principles must be based on clear public policies and practices that ensure employment of citizens with disabilities within the general workforce is the priority for public funding and service delivery. Actually, it's this next one I want to really emphasize. What this next one says, and feel free to read it, it doesn't make any difference what the policy is you have in writing. It doesn't make any difference what the laws and rules are that you have promulgated. That's not the point. What are you doing? In California is an exemplar. They do a wonderful job of having passed state legislation and putting all this wording in place of how DDS and the regional centers are supposed to operate. But they don't meet this. They're saying one thing and doing something else. Not even close. And by the way, that's not, I'm very cautious when I say, in my opinion. That's not an opinion, it's a fact. It's just a fact. Because I'm going to show you the statistics on what the employment situation is for people with developmental disabilities in the regional center system. It's a fact. I didn't collect the data, it's not mine. Okay, employment first policy in California. Let's see what this looks like. On October 9, and this is to be celebrated. This is like fantastic stuff that your state legislature has passed. Governor Brown signed AB 1041 Chesbrough, which establishes in state statute an employment first policy. Yikes, that's fabulous. California became the 12th state to enact employment first policy in law. It gets even better than this, by the way. Employment first policy from WIC section 4869A1, it is the policy of the state that opportunities for integrated competitive employment, now, notice this is actually a section of your state legislation. Integrated competitive employment shall be given highest priority for working age individuals with developmental disabilities. Look at this last sentence. Regardless of the severity of their disabilities. The employment first policy was established in furtherance of the purposes of this division, the Lanterman Act. So employment first is actually part of the Lanterman Act, which no other state has anything that even comes close to the Lanterman Act. I mean, which in and of itself is incredible because you have no waiting list. People may wait, but it's not because the state won't provide the service, it's because you can't find a provider or a vendor to deliver it, which is a different issue. To make services and supports available to enable people with developmental disabilities to approximate the pattern of everyday living available to people without disabilities of the same age. We don't even need the final rule. You know, we don't need the home and community-based final rule. You got it all right here. To people without disabilities of the same age to support integration of people with developmental disabilities into the mainstream life of the community and to bring about more independent, productive, normal lives in legislation. Oh, it gets better than this, by the way. Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act was signed into law on July 22nd, 2014. It is designed to help job seekers access employment, education, training, support services to succeed in the labor market. And this is federal. I am going to, after I move through this, I'm going to come back and look at state again and show you what else you got. I mean, it's like really amazing. WIOA focuses on individuals who have limited skills, lack work experiences, and face other barriers to economic success. It adds a new section, by the way, to the Rehab Act, which requires each state to provide pre-employment transition services for all eligible students with disabilities. That's why you see such a strong movement, in part, in special education in the public schools, because of WIOA, in part. Includes job exploration counseling, work-based learning experiences and internships, counseling related to transition, post-secondary education. By the way, somebody yesterday asked a really good question. I thought it might come up today, but they said, how is it that we're able to pay people to engage in employment without a wage certificate, but pay them only $2 an hour? Because many provider agencies have internships and practicum programs throughout the country, and they provide people what are called honorariums. They're not really considered an employee, but they'll put them in a job site for 3 months, 4 months, or something of that nature, or a month, and pay them an honorarium. And I will give you the answer to that question. I don't have a clue, but it's not an uncommon practice. It is a practice that's used with everybody. Sometimes an agency will contact me and they are financially distressed and say, we really would like you to do a presentation and train our staff, but we're not in a position to pay your fee. Would you be willing to take a $100 honorarium for the day? Well, I might as well not take anything, but I said, sure. So that concept of an honorarium or a practicum or internship fee is not unique to people with disabilities. It is done just generally. And the question that was asked of me yesterday is, how is that legal? And my answer is, I don't know. I'm not saying it's not legal. I don't understand how we're able to do that for people with disabilities. I mean, I understand how I can do it because I have informed consent and I'm willing to do it and I know what it means. Workplace readiness training and instruction in self-advocacy, as we were talking about earlier. And that's why so many of the public schools and their transition programs are working with these students and saying, okay, these are your challenges psychiatrically, physically, cognitively, and this is what you need to be able to tell an employer, and they'll role play with these kids. Each state is required to dedicate 15% of its federal grant funds to pre-employment transition services for students with disabilities. Half the states, and Enrique, we had asked some people from schools, didn't we here today? How many showed? Yeah, I wish they did. Hopefully we can encourage them to look at the video. Half the states' supported employment grants must be spent for the provision of services to youth with the most significant disabilities. Okay, now how can I best say this? I don't want to show a prejudice about providers because there's thousands and thousands of providers in this state, literally thousands. Part of the Landerman Act is to encourage people to become providers. No other state does that. I mean, you have thousands of providers who have, one group home where they support 3 people in employment, and there's no place else in the country that does that. You put out these RFPs to encourage this kind of thing. So, though I work with many provider agencies in the state, my contact has only been with a very small percentage because you have thousands. Yes, thank you so much, I got it. And this is going to take a minute because I want to finish this discussion. And of all the provider agencies I worked with regard to issues of employment, there is no one that has come close to Tierra del Sol. And anybody know Tierra del Sol? Sunland, California. Go to their website. Tierra del Sol, I've worked with them for over 20 years. They are the producers of my video DVD training series, a 7-part DVD series. And the guy who was executive director, his name is Steve Miller. And he retired about 4 or 5 years ago. To give you a little bit of a history, the reason I'm so impressed by them, there was a convent and a group of nuns, a religious order, that could no longer sustain their order, which is not unusual. And they had several hundred acres of land in Sunland, California. You can just imagine what that land was worth. It's incredible property. And when the order disbanded, they wanted to donate that property to an organization that was consistent with their mission, which made sense. They donated it in 1972 to Tierra del Sol. Tierra del Sol then used that property to create a campus day support environment. They had 250 people who were segregated in this campus. And they built an Olympic swimming pool because we like to swim. And they brought in some goats so we could pet, like little kids pet the goats, right? And they have goats, and they brought in chickens and all this kind of stuff. So some number of years after 1972, might have been a great number of years, here comes Steve Miller. And Steve says, we can't do this. These people have to be part of their community. So puts in place a plan to close the whole thing down, person by person by person. Tierra del Sol now has no campus where they support people. They've turned the campus into a conference center. Because when you go to an integrated supports, your staffing ratios must be enhanced almost always. I cannot support people with the same number of staff I do in a facility-based environment versus an integrated environment, and we're going to talk about that. The state is not likely to pay any provider more to make that happen. I'm sorry. So what Tierra del Sol said is if we turn this into a conference center, we should be able to generate a lot of money and use that money to hire more staff. Plus, if it's a conference center, people have got to have meals. We've got to mow the grass. We've got to clean this place up. And so now it becomes an opportunity for employment for the people who Tierra del Sol supported. So what I want to share with you is their mission. And they are intolerant. And I hope you will be intolerant. If you do not want to be part of their mission, that's great. You have a right. Go someplace else. Because they know who they are. And because they've stuck by their mission and their beliefs, people beat down their door to go there. So there are people, if people want to do this thing, they have a right to sit on their butt and not work. That's fine, you have that right. I don't want to be part of it. If your agency wants to be part of it, then be part of it. I'm hoping I can convince you you don't want to be part of it, okay? Take a look at their mission. Our mission, vision and mission. A strong, vibrant community is one in which all of its members contribute to the strengths and assets for the common good. Tierra's mission is to empower people with disabilities to fulfill their potential and desire to become productive. Now notice that word, productive citizens who are accepted, included, and valued. There again, that's part of the contribution. That is the non-productive aspect. For the contributions they make to the economic, that's critical. Civic, cultural vitality of the community. We are actively working toward the day when people with any type of disability are fully recognized as an integral part of our community as neighbors, co-workers, and contributors. Now look at the values, and then we'll go on break. Each and every human life has value and meaning. Very few providers will accept that, very few. Now you ask them, do you believe every human, now they raise their hand. Then why in the world is he sitting there putting puzzles together? Where's the meaning of his life? Regardless of the notion of disability, each person has the potential and the right to lead a full, productive, and personally meaningful life. A life with quality includes participation in the economic, cultural, civic, and spiritual affairs of the community. A life with quality includes loved ones and valued social relationships, inclusiveness. Families and communities are stronger when all of their members are accepted and valued for their contributions. And this lays out their strategy. I would encourage you to go to their website. Workforce development, college to careers, which is interesting. They have a very large number of people going to junior colleges and staff that support them. You are on a fixed schedule. You don't complete it in 2 years, we're done with you. And the only reason you're going to college is not for the sake of going to college. It has to be related towards you getting employment as soon as you're done to get closer to the kind of employment that you want to be involved with. Okay, so they have a lot of folks with autism that are doing stuff in software and programming and so forth. Careers in the arts. And they have the First Street Art Studios. Oh, anybody familiar with their First Street? Some of their folks are selling their paintings for $10,000, $15,000. Go on site. Some of their folks have paintings in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Some of the folks are not as skilled or talented, so they have them teach art classes to preschool and elementary school children. In other words, the people with disabilities, because you have to give and do for others. So if your art is not worthy of sale, what are you going to do with your art? You need to be doing something.